guys, welcome back to my channel and to another History of Fashion Week video. A couple of weeks ago I did a video on the history of New York Fashion Week, so if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to be linking it up here in the cards as well as down in the description box. But since Fashion Month started in New York, that's when I did the video of New York Fashion Week, and now Fashion Month is ending in Paris, of course, so I thought that I would do the history of Paris Fashion Week. Paris is part of the Big Four. There are multiple fashion weeks that go on worldwide, but the most important ones are Paris, Milan, London, and New York. And obviously Paris is kind of like the fashion capital of the world. We all know this. It's kind of home to the most recognizable and established designers like Chanel, Dior, Yves Saint Laurent, Givenchy, pretty much all the ones that everybody knows. Like even if you're not really into fashion, you've heard all of these brands before. However, before I start, I just want to apologize because I have a feeling that I'm going to be mispronouncing a lot of the French terms or words, and I took 5 years of French and my pronunciation should be a lot better than it actually is. I'm really sorry if I mispronounce some of these words, but anyway, let's just go ahead and get started. Fashion shows in Paris have been held since the early 18th century. However, at that time it was kind of like mannequins, and then the clients would go in and see what the collections look like. In the late 1800s, designer Charles Worth was kind of playing around with the idea of actually displaying his clothes in motion as opposed to just on mannequins. So if you didn't know, Charles Worth was a designer in the mid to late 1800s, and he's kind of like the father of haute couture. He's also credited for revolutionizing like the business of fashion. Charles Worth was a very innovative designer whose salon was frequently visited by like royalty and really important figures, and he's also the very first person to actually display his clothes on actual moving models and not mannequins. In 1865, the Chambre syndiquée de la haute couture was created to set specifications on what would be considered an haute couture house. So some of these specifications would include garments must be custom made to fit the wearer. They have to be sewn by multiple skilled artisans in separate fields for embroidery, stitching, and beading. And they must use the most high quality fabrics and materials available. And even though there's all these specifications and talks about haute couture, the term haute couture was actually not used until 1908. Paul Poiret, a French designer who, side note, actually worked with Charles Worth in 1901. But anyway, so he was kind of having similar thoughts to Charles Worth and wanted to display his clothing in a different manner. So he decided to kind of mix socializing with commerce. So he would throw these really big, lavish balls, and he would ask all of his guests to dress in their finest clothes and kind of get dressed up in certain themes. His most famous party was the 1002 Nights, and this happened on June 24th, 1911. And at this party, he debuted two of his most iconic pieces, one being the harem pants and the other being the lampshade dress. And at this party there was like a Persian orchestra, there was parrots on the trees and all these like embellishments on the trees with like thousands of sparkling lights. And he also asked his guests to dress in like a Persian style, and if you didn't fit the theme and you didn't dress the part, you had two options. One was to just leave, and then the other option was to actually wear some of his pieces from his collection. And John Paquin was the first designer to dress models to go to like certain events, so like the opera or like horse races, and that would be used as like promotion, which is pretty much what happens now. You see that all the time in like red carpets or like influencers, that sort of thing. But could you imagine early 1900s getting dressed by a designer to go to like the opera? That is like a dream. In 1921, the French created the PAIS, which stands for l'Association de la Protection des Industries Artiques Stationnaires. Again, I am so sorry, I'm totally mispronouncing that. But that was set in place to prevent designers from being copied. So designers would actually photograph their garment from like every single angle. That way they would keep a record of what the designs look like. By the late 1920s and 30s, Paris was filled with renowned fashion designers like Coco Chanel and Elsa Schiaparelli. Shows became less of a big party and instead became smaller and individualized affairs. Each fashion house would present their collection using models at exclusive client-only events. And these events were really closely guarded and there was no photographers allowed. At this time, Paris was feeling a little bit nervous about New York because for the past few years, American designers had been looking to Paris runways for inspiration for their own collections, and obviously Paris and France, the rest of France, feeling the effects of World War II, this kind of gave New York the upper hand, and American designers were able to showcase their talents and thus kind of labeling New York as a fashion city. Not the fashion capital, but definitely established itself as a fashion city. However, Paris did have a trick up its sleeve by the name of Christian Dior, and in 1947, he debuted his first collection by the name of Carrel, which introduced us to the world the new look. And this was actually very highly publicized. Like, it was definitely a lot of press around it because it was allowed to be photographed. The new look helped silhouettes go from structured military looks to voluminous skirts, small waists, and the comeback of traditional femininity. Dior helped dictate lines and shapes for women's wear along with Givenchy, Balmain, and Jacques Fath. In 1945, there was a new set of rules and regulations for houses to be considered an haute couture house, and those new rules included designs must be made to order for private clients. Each atelier must have at least 20 members of staff. Each season, the couture house must present a collection of at least 35 looks with both daytime and evening wear to the Paris press. And I assume this is why haute couture is only shown in Paris, and there are actually only 14 houses right now that are labeled as haute couture houses, which I found really interesting. I actually didn't know that before researching this video. I thought it was more than that, but it's actually only 14. Along with Paris Fashion Week, there's also Couture Week, which is a lavish affair. But contrary to popular belief, Couture Week is actually not a big moneymaker. Some fashion houses actually lose money by showing, and it's all about the opulence, the prestige, and the status. In the 1960s, a new name would emerge, Yves Saint Laurent, and launching a pret-a-porter line in the 1960s inspired by youth culture, along with the space-age designs from Pierre Cardin, thus bringing popularity to ready-to-wear. While Paris had been showing fashion shows for decades, the first official Paris Fashion Week wasn't actually until 1973 with the formation of the Fédération Française de la Couture, and it actually kicked off with the Battle of Versailles. And if you watched my New York video, you've already heard me talk about this, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but for all of those who haven't seen the New York video, the Battle of Versailles is an iconic fashion show that was held at the Palace of Versailles. It was originally meant to kind of raise funds to actually restore Versailles, and the show basically put French designers like Yves Saint Laurent, Dior, Pierre Cardin, Givenchy against the American designers like Holsten, Oscar de la Renta, and Klein against each other. It was kind of like a really big fashion standoff, if you will. However, the Americans actually came out victorious due to their youthful approach, their use of black models, and being a little bit more inclusive, as well as their performance by Liza Minnelli. From then on, fashion shows in Paris became really big spectacles. So things from Muglier's 1984 Extravaganza, which was the first public show with a paying audience, a huge audience of 6,000 people, which is crazy to me. 6,000 people at a fashion show, that's crazy. To Jean-Paul Gaultier's show-stopping conical bra, which was made famous by Madonna when she wore it in her 1990 Blonde Ambitious tour. Chanel at the hands of Karl Lagerfeld also created some really memorable moments on the runway, as well as Comme des Garçons also revolutionized the way that we kind of think about style, which is really, really interesting. Paris fashion shows happen across a lot of historical monuments. So for example, Le Grand Palais is the venue of choice for Chanel, Le Musée Rodin hosts Dior in the Garden, and the Louvre is the home to Louis Vuitton. So despite Paris being home to some of the most established designers, smaller brands and designers actually try to incorporate themselves into Paris Fashion Week by having showrooms or inviting clients for fittings during this time just to kind of establish themselves in the industry. Similar to the fashion parties hosted by Paul Pire, Fashion Week is also a time for some of the biggest fashion after parties, which gives a chance to established designers to communicate with friends, business partners, clients, and the press in an informal, playful environment. So the exact same thing like New York Fashion Week, Paris is hosting its very first fashion week since the start of the pandemic. And for the past year and a half-ish, designers have been showing their collections digitally, so through fashion films or online collections or just photographs online. But this actually opened up a little bit of room in the fashion calendar because normally during Paris Fashion Week, there's a different show every hour, and that kind of gives the guests a chance to go from one venue to another venue. But obviously, since everything was digital, you didn't have to travel to go anywhere. So this actually opened up some room, and they made shows every half an hour, and this pretty much doubled the amount of collections you could see, and this made room for some newbies like Ernest W. Baker, Egon Lab, and Cool TM, which I'm not gonna lie, I had not heard of until I made this video, so I'm gonna have to look up their collections because I have no idea what their collections look like, but anyway. So unlike New York, Paris is actually adding days to their New York Fashion Week. They're hosting 9 days as opposed to the 7 days, and New York is doing 5, so that's a really interesting conversation there. I did a whole video on if Fashion Week is still relevant, so I'm going to be linking that up here if you're interested, but I just thought that was kind of a really random note to add. So this year there's going to be 92 houses participating, 35 of which are hosting live runway shows, 32 plan on hosting physical presentations with a mix of video and invitation-only events, and the remaining will remain digital. And yeah, that is a brief history of a Paris Fashion Week. I hope you guys will like this video. Like I said, I will be doing Milan and London in the next fashion month, so make sure you guys are subscribed so you guys can see that in February. I tried really hard to stay on topic for this video because there are so many topics that I could like branch out in and discuss, especially for the designers that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. I would love to kind of talk about them. I'm going to do a little bit more research just for myself, just because I'm really interested in the topics. But I tried really hard to keep it really linear for this video, so hopefully it made sense, because I feel like if I was to incorporate all the information I wanted to add, it would be really confusing. But anyway, so I hope you guys liked this video. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on your post notifications so that you don't miss out on any new videos, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!